I think one of the things about white culture is that it numbs our hearts. The conditioning into white identity is one of hyper-individualism, is one of hyper-intellectualism. So we love to think, we love to analyze, we love to rationalize, and we love to throw things out the window as soon as we're done thinking and analyzing. And that process, of being connected to the land, of having no one to turn to except for the land herself, the clouds, the waters, the earth. There was something about that that gave me the strength to keep going, and that actually helped me to develop this sense of accountability that you're talking about. Because the thing is like, when you grow up white, you grow up white, middle class, cisgendered, so much privilege like I did. It's very easy to think that you're innocent, and everyone and everything around you reinforces that notion all the time. And so, when you start pulling apart and dissecting and shedding that sense of innocence that we've inherited, it can feel very threatening, because it can feel like your whole identity is coming apart. You don't know who you could possibly be if you weren't innocent, right?
Welcome to Everlutionary, a podcast about how we can heal and transform with the world. Every episode of my show, we explore conversations around philosophy, science, mysticism, social justice, how we can be change catalysts and activators and mobilize each other to create a world free of violence. I'm your host, Hawah Kasat. Peace, peace, peace. Hello, Hilary. How are you? Welcome to the Everlutionary podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm wonderful. I'm so glad to be with you, Hawah. Thank you.
Thank you for making the time. Thank you for all the incredible work you're doing in the world, and your book, your message, and the way you're showing up. It means a lot, and I'm really excited to have you. How's your heart? Let's start there. How's your heart? How are you doing? What's been coming up for you lately? What's been inspiring you?
Well, I feel like my heart is a very full and overflowing basket right now, because there are many things to look at that are challenging and thought-provoking and concerning. And there's also the beauty of life and nature that surrounds us all the time, no matter what we humans are up to. And so I just came back from a beautiful walk. I live at high elevation in northern Arizona on Diné, Hopi, Havasupai, Pueblo, Apache land. And I just walked around my block and got to glimpse the sacred mountain of kinship that is presiding over this whole community. And I got to see the beautiful sunflowers blooming and the apples that are starting to ripen on the trees and the cherries all through my neighborhood. And so I'm really grateful for that grounding and for Mother Nature always, connecting me back to what's real.
Thank you for sharing that and acknowledging the land. I'm currently on Massawamek land, old Iroquois nation. Lots of tribal trade routes were here. I'm near the headwaters of the now known as Potomac River in Appalachia at the moment. So definitely like near the Piscataway as well, and the Rappahannock, which are also indigenous to this land. So thank you for naming that. It's so important. Your work, it's so palpable right now. And a lot of our listeners, I mean, this word is something that comes up a lot. And I just want to actually start with the word. The word is reparations. And it's a word that we hear a lot. What does that word mean to you? What does reparations mean to you? And how do you see that as being something important in this day and time we live in?
Well, I can share that a little story about that word. When I was trying to land on the subtitle for my book, which is Becoming a Good Relative, Calling White Settlers Toward Truth, Healing, and Repair, some of the people I was working with at the time said, let's put reparations in the subtitle. And I thought that over for some time. And eventually I said back to them, we cannot put that in the subtitle because that word in our American context and our culture is so loaded. My
Mm,
experience is that that word is so loaded. The minute you say it or read it, people's defenses go up.
yeah.
And I don't want to block the conversation from happening by setting people into defense mode from moment one. So
Hmm.
I want to debunk that a little bit because if anyone listening has ever felt defensiveness or fear or a blockage, or maybe even a whole bunch of intellectual reasons why reparations might be impossible, I just want to encourage you to hear that word with a little bit more spaciousness and curiosity and beyond some of the binary ways that we've been taught to think about that word. To me, that word personally is focused on the spiritual work that it takes to look at the historical context of our country. And I'm speaking from a, United States perspective, but that is a very similar perspective held in Canada, in Australia, in various parts throughout the world, all the places that have experienced settler colonialism by European powers.
Mm,
Um, and so, um, it, for me, it's about looking at the history through the truth, because many of us have only been taught a very simplified, whitewashed, sometimes completely false version of events, and that I believe that miseducation about history is what makes the word reparations so scary sometimes.
mm,
And it's not a word to be scared of. For me, it has come to imply joy, empowerment, healing, right relations. All of those things are embedded in the word reparations for me now that I've been through a process of working with them for several years.
I love that. I love that you bring joy and healing into this word. I mean, which implicitly the word to me, I hear repair and how important it is to repair any relationships that might not be whole or broken. So really appreciate that. It is a loaded word, and we all have different relationships to language. So I appreciate the way that you've kind of framed it for us to start with. You, in writing your book, you've invited white settlers, and just to clarify, you identify as a white European. Am I correct?
Yes, I'm a European descended settler whose ancestors began arriving here 9 to 12 generations ago.
Okay. Wow. And so you're inviting other white settlers to reckon with their ancestral history and engage in a process of healing and repair. Um, can you share what sparked this deep personal journey for you? I know a lot of white people. I've got a lot of white friends and colleagues and acquaintances as well. And I know not all white people are really desiring to take such a critical look at history as you seem to be. And so I'm curious, like, what set you on this trajectory? Why have you decided to take on this torch and mantle?
Yeah, that's such a good question. In many ways, I didn't choose it. It chose me. I feel
Mhm.
there were some things that began happening about 10 years ago where synchronicities started appearing in my life. And up until that time, I had never had any interest in this subject material at all. I had no concept of ancestors as beings who are currently present and with us and influencing current events. I had no concept of, settler colonialism or, what has happened to the indigenous communities of this land or the other communities of color on this land. I had none of that awareness at all. I didn't have any
Mm,
relationships, and I wasn't that curious about it either. But 10 years ago, a book of one of the things that happened was that a book of family genealogy came into my hands, and it had been written by my great uncle in the 90s. And in that book, on the last night of 2015, I learned that I had ancestors who came here from the Scottish Highlands in 1739 on my dad's side, and then went on to receive grants of stolen land and enslave people in Mississippi for several generations. And so overnight, that material came into my consciousness and I was shocked. And in
Right.
hindsight, I shouldn't have been shocked at all. None of us who are white should be shocked when we learn these things about our family. But many of us are shocked because we've been insulated in a blanket of privilege that keeps us completely in denial about what has gone on here. And you know, it's not our fault that that bubble of denial has been built around us, that it was constructed by systems and people from generations back. And it is our responsibility to change it. So that's kind of how I hold it. We don't need to feel guilty or shame about the denial that we've inherited, but we do need to do things differently for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds incredibly shocking. Like, you're saying this is like your great grandparents, or like at what level, what distance
Yeah.
in Mississippi were these ancestors towards your current bloodline?
The first immigrant from the Scottish Highlands was my sixth great grandfather. And then it was his grandson who started receiving land grants. He went down to Mississippi on foot with a bunch of people and received a grant of land that had been signed by Andrew Jackson that was stolen from
Wow.
the Choctaw people. And then the only reason that there was a record of the enslaved people was that at some point when one of his descendants died, I believe it was his grandson, um, the family fell into dispute about the estate, just like what happens today in families with wills and so forth. And so there were court records detailing the names of these enslaved people and the monetary values that had been assigned to them. And
Wow.
when I read that, I mean, there's no word to describe the feeling. It was just
Hmm.
is utter sickness to see those names and those dollar amounts. And it sent me into a crisis for
Hmm.
sure. I was in a crisis for, an acute crisis for several months, and then an ongoing, unfolding development and changing identity that has been going on for years.
Wow. Wow. That's really deep. And how are you, how do you continue, like, in this moment in your own life, as you learn this history, this personal history? The emotional complexity of that sounds really intense. There's probably some grief, there's heartbreak, there might be a feeling of shame that comes up. I'm seeing this being a pivotal, clearly, like, a moment that created great inertia for you to do some deep digging and self-reflection. And how are you, like, how do you keep processing that? How do you keep alchemizing that over the past 10 years? Do you still hold grief? Do you still hold shame? How does that come up for you in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I do still hold grief because the problem is not only ongoing, but it's now getting exacerbated even more. So there's grief about that. And I've been very fortunate to have been mentored by many wise people who have taught me to hold grief in a way that is ritualized and embodied. So it's not just about sitting and stewing in it and getting stuck. It's about moving it through my body. It's about using ritual elements to transmute it.
Mhm.
Um, as for the shame, I did go through several years of being totally debilitated by shame. Along in tandem with all of this learning about my own family, I was also building very deep relationships with Indigenous peoples and communities, which is kind of astounding. Why would they want anything to do with someone like me? And yet
Mm.
they did. And that grace that was shown to me was so tremendous and so astonishing that it gave me the strength to keep going. So as I would sit with Native friends and in Native, community organizing spaces, etc., I would hear what they're facing. I would see it firsthand. I would feel it with my hands and my feet and my everything, my whole being. And I would feel shame. And then there came a point where I realized the shame I feel is nothing compared to what they have been through and what they're currently going through. And I need to use this shame that I feel to actually change my behavior and my way of being and doing. And it's
Mm,
not fair for me to just sit here and be debilitated by shame. They don't get that luxury. So I'm not going to do it either. So, um, I've definitely, I have worked with those two emotions throughout the process, but have found ways to not get stuck in them.
got it. I really appreciate the lens here. And, we've been talking on my podcast. I've been doing a series right now that's on racism and anti-racism work and colonization. You're bringing a really powerful perspective here towards white fragility, and just understanding how to show up. And for listeners right now that might identify as white European, um, I'm I'm just so curious about like how how you came to this desire for deeper study, deeper self-reflection, where there are many white people that know or learn about family histories of of being slaveholders and having land that was stolen and profiting from that land for generations, but it doesn't seem to phase them or affect them or seem to change their perspective on privilege and the planet. um I feel like I'm still stuck here, and I'm wondering if there's any other insight you have as to like why you, why are you a white woman that's been like shaken by this, like really like you're disturbed to what
Right.
feels like your bones. Like I've listened to other interviews what you've done. I mean, you've been really disturbed, and you're tending to this as if it's your responsibility, where I feel like that same sense of responsibility or culpability, it's not as status quo. It's not as normal. And I don't know if you have reflections as to why, but I just for folks that are identifying as white European, I'm wondering if you have insight for them and for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things about white culture is that it numbs our hearts.
Mm,
The conditioning into white identity is one of hyper individualism, is one of hyper intellectualism. So we love to think, we love to analyze, we love to rationalize, and we love to throw things out the window as soon as we're done thinking and analyzing. and and I
mm,
think that the happy accident, or maybe it was somehow orchestrated in the ethers that happened to me, was that at the same time I learned this information, I was also being invited into deep ritual and ceremonial containers that enabled me to sit on the land for many days at a time, fasting without water or food, to be all alone. Nobody but me out there under the stars, under the rising sun, under the afternoon heat, with the flies in my ears, filthy, starving, you name it. Um, and that process of being connected to the land, of having no one to turn to except for the land herself, the clouds, the waters, the earth, there was something about that that gave me the strength to keep going, and that actually helped me to develop this sense of accountability that you're talking about. Um, because the thing is like when you grow up white, you grow up white, middle class, cisgendered, so much privilege like I did. Um, it's very easy to think that you're innocent, and everyone and everything around you reinforces that notion all the time.
mhm,
And so when you start pulling apart and dissecting and shedding that sense of innocence that we've inherited, it can feel very threatening because it can feel like your whole identity is coming apart. You don't know who you could possibly be if you weren't innocent, right?
Right.
Without that innocence, who am I? Who can I ever? There is no one for me to become. I am a shell of a human being without that innocence, right? And so I think what those times on the land did for me is that it gave me a new identity
Mm.
that was grounded to, to earth, to reality, to the stars, to the spirit world, to my own ancestors. All of that came alive for me through that process, and it gave me the strength to keep going.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It sounds like you really took time, and you were also immersing and building relationships with those with people who do not identify as white and European, which allows you to sort of dissolve some of those barriers and those walls, and see the kindness and see the interconnectedness between all people as well, which I think is a fascinating way to start deconstructing the mystery, and also not taking it so personally, right? I think perhaps there's a fear in like having to acknowledge something, or to acknowledge that I'm a part of a legacy which has caused pain, right? Nobody wants to be identified in that way. So we want to identify in ways naturally that make us feel positive and joyful. And this does require a sense of coming face to face with grief, and also with accountability, which is tough. Accountability is hard, and especially when there's already privilege involved. Truth telling is a central theme, I think, to the work you invite readers to undertake in your books. So as we engage in truth telling, and how these stories around settler colonialism, and how a lot of that truth has been erased. There's been erasure within our textbooks and historical narratives. And then the ongoing impacts and the effects of that white settler colonialism. How can we approach this in ways that foster healing rather than perpetuating this harm or defensiveness that we're just talking about? Like, how do we approach these conversations with people that don't want to have them?
Right. Well, I actually have a twofold answer to that question. So let me start with the ancestral branch. So I have been very lucky to be influenced by the work of people like Lila June Johnston, who's a Dene scholar, Resma Menakem, who's a somatic, healer and wonderful author. Um, I know there are many others as well, but those are on the top of my mind, those two. And from them, I started developing this realization that, first of all, my people were not always white. Whiteness is very new. That's a new invention. It began in the 1600s in this country. It began being written into law with the purpose of consolidating land into the hands of elite men who are white. And before that, our ancestors were, traveling all over the place throughout Africa and the Middle East and Central Asia and all of Europe without any concept of whiteness. That didn't even exist. So that was one thing, to realize that my people and I are bigger and older than whiteness.
Mm.
The second thing was to realize that there were millennia of very difficult events in Europe that preceded people coming over here. And you look at the Roman expansion, all the centuries of war, the plague, the Inquisition, the witch hunts, all of these extremely violent, traumatic events that went into the cellular memory and the bodily knowing of people generation after generation. And then, after they were thoroughly traumatized amongst each other, they came over here, right? without
Right.
resolution to that trauma. So that's been one thing that's helped me. The other piece of this is storytelling. So taking into account this whole understanding of we were not always white, our people went through very difficult events in Europe. They went through their own deep oppression and violence against each other. And then taking that understanding, the way that I have found most effective to talk about this is through personal storytelling. And
Mm,
I learned that the first leg of my learning that was because I was working on this book for 8 years, and I had many editors and readers, and I had many people say to me, all the parts of this book that are you on your soapbox are not working. You need to take them out. And so I have hundreds of pages of material that were removed because they were lectures. And so, you know, that was humbling. I didn't
mm,
enjoy hearing that. But
mhm.
I'm glad they told me because I needed to know that. And I think we all need to know that lectures and judgment and blame are not going to get us anywhere. We need to connect with our hearts and we need to share our stories because stories are the universal human glue that connect us to each other with empathy. And so I really try to focus on that.
Yeah. Focus on the truth telling of your own personal story and your narrative, which you were doing when we started talking about how you learned about your colonial past, right? And how to come to terms with that, and what does that mean for you in your current incarnation, which is such an important part of the work and doing the work. Um, in your book, you explore the concept of a reparative framework, and how they can guide healing. And we opened this conversation with me asking about what reparations means to you. Can you explain what reparative frameworks um, are for what reparative frameworks are and how they shape the way that we understand responsibility and healing in the
Yeah.
context of settler colonialism?
Yeah. I have a Google Doc that I will share with you for show notes that is called A Guide to Making a Personal Reparations Plan.
Okay.
And by reading that doc, you get a full sense of what reparative frameworks are. But to explain a little bit here, for me, reparative frameworks are frameworks that look at any given situation in the context of historical context of why did people immigrate over here? What shape did they arrive in when they landed here? What were the indigenous people doing on this land already? How long had they been here? How many diverse civilizations of indigenous communities were already here? What about the African people who were kidnapped from the continent? Who were they? Were they doctors and teachers and experts and engineers and priests? Were they holy people and mothers and children? Yes, they were. They were full and complete human beings. And so it's looking at all of those facets of history and letting all of that inform any action that we take right now. It's also looking at the current context. How are these communities doing right now? How is the maternal health rate for Black mothers? How is the state of women on Native American reservations who are going missing and murdered with zero explanation, zero investigation? When you look at those things, you see we are still living in a settler colonial state.
Mm,
The way that things are unfolding might have changed a little bit. It's a different iteration today, but it's basically the same blueprint of violence and oppression from
yeah.
500 years ago. It's the same. So I feel like um, history is informing the present. And looking at that arc is what informs our action right now. And those are reparative frameworks. And then it's also about looking at ourselves and not saying, I feel really bad about this, so I'm going to go scramble around and fix a bunch of stuff because I know best. Nope. That's and I've learned that the hard way.
Right.
I have done that. I've done the white savior. I've fallen in that trap many times, and I probably will again. And it's just a matter of seeing when it happens, and digging yourself out and going, okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try this again. And
Yeah,
so I don't think anyone's asking us to be perfect, but they are asking us to try.
absolutely. Oh, I love it. I love it. That's great. And for those that are listening, if you remember, in the show notes, we'll have a link to the guide to making a personal reparations plan. And within it are some incredible resources, including ways to learn about the Liberated Capital Initiative, and then Coming to the Table, the Reparations Project, the Truth Telling Project. There's an article in here called 106 Things White People Can Do for Racial Justice, and how to be an ally for Indigenous, or to Indigenous people, how to be an ally to Indigenous people. So lots of resources in that guide that we encourage you to check out from the show notes. I'm excited to dig deeper here, especially around this piece around where do we move from needing to reconcile and create healing and reconciliation, and the importance of starting perhaps with an apology or forgiveness as a part of a process of repair. And I'm wondering if you can speak to the dynamics between apology and forgiveness, especially within these intersectional, complex histories of oppression and violence that we're trying to unpack.
Absolutely. I have been very blessed to receive mentorship and guidance over the last several years from an Oglala Lakota elder named Basil Braveheart. He is right now 91 years old. He's a Korean War combat veteran. He's a retired addiction counselor, and he lives on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And Basil taught me the healing power of apology. And one of the interesting things, I think many of us, when we learn something like this about our families, or even if we're just coming, into awareness about the privilege that we carry around today, many of us feel guilt and shame and the impulse to apologize. If we direct that apology to a human being, it can very easily go sideways. That has been my experience. It's a much more steady and grounded and humble way to start, to actually write a prayer of apology that is never read aloud, never published, never shared with anyone, but that is a communication between us and the divine. And then that prayer can be ritually burned or alchemized somehow. And there's something about that kind of an apology that has the capacity to create change. It changes us from the inside out. In some cases, people have expressed the desire for apologies. And my one exception to this guideline that I have is the apology that I wrote to Edgar Villanueva, who's a good friend of mine, several years ago. And the reason I wrote that apology is because I had read an advanced copy of his book, which is called Decolonizing Wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And I, through reading that manuscript, I realized he welcomes apology. And he also explains very clearly in that book what kind of apology is welcome. Not all apologies are welcome. And so by following his lead, I was able to write an apology that has brought a lot of healing to Edgar and me. But it was very carefully thought out. It was rewritten at least 50 times, and it was delivered in a very specific way. So that's a little bit of what I know about apology. Apology is not a performance. It should never be a performance. It should come from the heart.
Wow. I love that. I love that. And for listeners that are tuned in right now, Edgar Villanueva is the founder of the Decolonizing Wealth Project, and is also a national best-selling author and also going to be a guest here. I think the episode right after this one, you're going to be listening to Edgar, who it sounds like, Hilary, you wrote an apology to Edgar. So this is wonderful to see that we'll be able to connect the next episode with this episode, which I love. I mean, to me, an apology, it's like, it's such a deep, meaningful way to start inertia, right? There's like a recognition of harm, intentional or not intentional, right? There's many perhaps perspectives, and some white people might have this perspective that, well, that wasn't me, that was my ancestors. It's not, I didn't do it. I don't have to apologize for that. That wasn't, those aren't my behaviors, those aren't my actions. What do you say to that?
I love that you just rattled all those things off. Because you nailed it. That's it. That's our whole line of defense and reaction.
Yeah.
Yes, good job. What I say to that is that no one should. There are no shoulds with this, but radical apology, which is the kind I'm talking about, the kind that creates change, the kind that is a commitment to doing things differently moving forward. Radical apology is a form of healing, and it's a form of liberation. So it's more of a choice of saying, well, do I want to be spinning my wheels in the muck of all of these centuries of pain that I can't really acknowledge and that I feel really ambivalent about? Or do I want to be free? It's as simple as that, And for me, I spun my wheels in the muck for years. And finally, when I met Basil, I thought, I want to be free. I want to be free. And I followed his example because he is descended from people who were alive at the time of the Wounded Knee Massacre in 1890. And his grandmother, when Basil was 5 years old, his grandmother taught him about the massacre. And she said, don't hold any anger in your heart toward the soldiers who committed that massacre. Forgive them and forgive their grandparents because they didn't know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you imagine one of the most, if not the most deadliest massacre in American history, holding it that way? And the thing, when he told me that story, the thing that I could see about him is that I could see, even though he lives only 20 miles from that site, even though the Oglala Lakota people are living in unbelievable poverty that has been imposed on them by the United States government, he's free. He is spiritually free. And he offered that possibility to me too. And so I tried it, and he was right.
Yeah, I mean, I love the radical apology idea, and I feel like there's a connection to what I remember even recently in some countries, like New Zealand, I think was one of them, where the government had apologized, like publicly for the first time, apologized for the theft and the stealing of indigenous lands. Of course, those that are apologizing are, I mean, this is the future, right? Like the past was the past. We're apologizing for something that happened in the past. Who is supposed to give the apology? What does that apology really mean? I mean, these are all things that are coming up for me in real time. And I'm not quite sure. I know we're investigating and we're in inquiry together right now in this conversation, but I'm not sure if I fully yet have grasped. Like, if I was that person that was like, well, that was my great, 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 great grandfather, I don't have to apologize for what he did. That wasn't me. I still don't know how to get over that hump. I mean, I hear you on the radical apology, but I'm just like, where, for someone that doesn't want to take accountability, for someone that's just convinced that that's not their legacy, they're living a whole nother life. Maybe they're working in the environmental justice movement. Maybe, who knows, they're working for Deloitte or some other company. And they're just not, they're not buying into that. They're like, oh, I don't have to apologize or take responsibility. I think it comes back to the very beginning of our conversation. Like, why would we take accountability? Who is to take accountability? And what does accountability look like? Especially when there's denial, and a lot of denial and erasure of history. And so I hear you, and I'm also still not, I'm not, I'm like, I'm still struggling to like figure out what's the reason for someone to come around the corner and have a revelation like, oh yeah, maybe I should think about what accountability or an apology is like, even though it wasn't me necessarily.
Right. Right. Well, and you're right. There are many, many, many of us out there who aren't ready to do this. And, over my years of working with Basil, specifically on these two topics of apology and forgiveness, I've heard him say that if someone is not ready to begin this, we have to respect their boundaries and their wishes, and that's okay. Not everybody is going to come to this at the same time. And the thing is it really has to spring up from inside. It is like a
Mm,
soul calling to do this. And so, I went through some time of trying to convince my fellow white people in certain settings and environments that, we really should do this. We need to do this. And it didn't work. It backfired. And so at that point, I realized if I continue pushing this, then I am just employing the techniques of white supremacy to try to proselytize to these people, right?
right.
This is not respectful of their sovereignty. And so, and it's also hurting me to constantly be rejected. So then I came around to the viewpoint of it's okay that that's where they are. It's okay. But I'm going to focus on the growing network, which is, I see it almost like a mycelial network of individuals all over this country, as well as Canada and Australia. And I'm in touch with people in the UK, same way, where there is a bubbling up and there is a groundswell of individuals who are waking up and saying, yes, I want to engage with this. Yes, I feel this call. Yes, my heart is pulling me toward this, and I don't care what it takes. I will do it no matter what. And so I've really switched approaches, and I'm putting my energy into that. That is not, it's not always obvious on the surface. We're not on the news every night. But we are growing and connecting nonetheless.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really helpful. I think that was the bridge I needed. That really helped me. And reminding me that this is a spiritual work as well, right? There's a spiritual effort here. There's a deep existential effort as well. It does require some permeability of time and space. It requires a deeper look into ancestral lineage and bloodlines. It, it's yeah, it's not black and white. There are many colors in the palette here, um, which invites deep curiosity around. Where can I lean into? Where's my discomfort in this, and how can I alleviate suffering and harm, right? Which is a big part of what it means to take accountability, in my opinion, at least. I I am thinking as you talk about, you've spoken so much, and you've named many mentors in your life, Indigenous peoples who have been your guides and mentors. You seem to have been building solidarity throughout communities, and I'd love to learn and understand more about how you're approaching this concept of solidarity, and what does meaningful solidarity look like in the context of your book.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It actually, a concept you mentioned earlier plays into solidarity, so I'll tie them together, and that is discomfort. So, in white culture, most of us, a lot of the time, can choose to be comfortable. Many of us can opt out of situations that make us uncomfortable. And that's one of the functions of white privilege and white supremacy, is that we don't have to feel discomfort, many of us. And so one thing I have found along the way is that discomfort is actually the doorway to solidarity. Sitting with that discomfort. So I've been involved with Indigenous-led community organizing in my community for the last 10 years. And I can't tell you how uncomfortable it is for me. I sit in those rooms still. I sit in the room and I'm just like, oh man, okay, I got to keep my mouth shut right now. And I don't know what to do with this thing I just heard. Right. And,
Mm,
or, ooh, this is just it. This is killing me inside to see this elder in tears over what is the extraction that's happening from this sacred mountain where we live. Like, this is just, it hurts me,
right.
and many different versions of that. And for me, solidarity looks like sitting there anyway. It looks like coming back anyway. It looks like learning how to keep my mouth shut until there's actually something that needs to be said. And learning how to discern when that is. It looks like not coming into that space thinking that I'm going to fix it or solve it or that I know best, but coming in with humility and saying, what is it that's needed here? Is a note taker needed? Is a meeting scheduler needed? Is a meal needed? Is some cooking needed? Would it be helpful for me to take out the trash or wash the dishes? And if any of those questions are answered with a yes, then to just simply do it, you know, and to follow through, to be consistent, to be trustworthy. Those are the steps, the baby steps toward developing solidarity. And, when you show up consistently like that over years, pretty soon those communities are your family, you know? It's just like my own children, my own parents. Like I could never betray them because we're relatives now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that. I'm really inspired by that by that frame. It's so important, and it's really the conversations that we need to be having in a larger way across all of our places, workplaces, school systems, classrooms, um, culturally. In many ways, though, right now we're seeing these conversations being deeply dismantled. I feel like there was some progress that was being made across at least the United States post George Floyd. There was a real racial reckoning. Um, Many white people, coming to want to deeply understand what white privilege means, white fragility means, how to really be true allies, how to be in solidarity with with BIPOC communities and people of color from around the planet. And then now you see a lot of fear. You see a lot of the dismantling of those diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in major corporations and even within public school systems. Right, I am deeply discouraged by how we've completely reversed course and are now, instead of having this conversation, the conversation you and I are having, which feels like a healthy conversation. I'm a person of color here. I'm a cisgendered male, and I'm having a really intimate, powerful conversation with you, and you're a white-bodied European American, right? And so to engage in healthy dialogue feels like a really critical part of what it means to grow emotionally, spiritually. And yet we see these conversations uh, being shunned. The leadership in the current administration, the political leadership has done all they can to prevent us from having these conversations. So I wonder about that. I wonder, like, are we taking a step backwards right now? And the young people who are being shielded from doing this deep investigation and reflection, like, what's going to happen to them? What does it mean for that generation of young people? So I'm curious, like, through your research and through the work you've been doing, to connect with all of these various groups of people from around the world, like, how do you actively keep engaging in a time when it feels like we are we're facing really severe headwinds? Like, we're trying to walk against hurricane force winds right now. How do you keep deeply engaging in times like these?
You know, there's a quote that's coming to me as I'm listening to you, and I'm just so sorry because I can't remember who said it. But I know we can find it later and put it in the show notes.
Okay.
So it's they tried to bury us, but they didn't realize that we were seeds. Something to
Yeah.
that effect. And that's kind of what I see going on right now. When I look at the political climate and the big actors on this circus stage right now, all I see is scared little boys who are so deeply fragile and traumatized that they have to derive a sense of power from harming others. You know, that's not what it means to be honorable. That's not what it means to be a leader. You know, real leaders take care of the people. Real leaders are humble. Real leaders redistribute wealth. They don't hoard. They don't sit on a big pile of gold and power like dragons breathing fire.
Hmm.
They go out amongst the people and they return what they have been given. And that's through speech, that's through actions, that's through material resources, everything. And so I feel like we're going through a phase of where delusion has center stage, but it won't last forever. I don't know. We may not see the end of it in our lifetimes, but whenever I get discouraged, I really try to take the long view and remember that we are intergenerational people. We have always been. We have always been walking and standing on the shoulders of many, many, many generations who came before us, and there will be many generations who come after us. So I try to look at it that way in the long arc of time. And I think it's paramount at this moment that those of us who are connecting across the world with these shared hearts and with shared purpose and shared values, we need to stay strong and we need to not be quiet. We need to keep doing what we do. We need to play the long game and we need to stay steady, and not get distracted by this chaos that's being manufactured because it's not real. It's just all based in lies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. And that is one of my favorite quotes. In fact, I've got on my Instagram wall, I have that quote uh, posted. They tried to bury us, but they did not realize we were seeds. It's such a powerful affirmation. And I did a quick Google search right here, and what comes up, one of the things that comes up is that it's a Mexican proverb,
Oh, okay.
and that the long history of this phrase can be traced most recently to Mexican activists who used it in support of the Ayotzinapa 43, which were 43 students who disappeared. Uh, so, and then there's another attribution too to a Greek poet, uh, Dinos Christianopoulos, which I'm sure I pronounced incorrectly, which he wrote back in, it sounds like, the late 70s. So not sure exactly which one came first, but Mexican activists and also perhaps a Greek poet from the late 70s. But what a wonderful reminder. What a
Thank you for
wonderful
looking
reminder.
that up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, it's a good one. I love that one. So you have your book, and your book is one thing that struck my attention is that you're returning all the income from your book sales to organizations dedicated to decolonization, which is awesome. And I believe one of the organizations that you're dedicating book income from is to the Decolonizing Wealth Project. Am I right? Am I right about that?
that's right. Yes.
Okay, so Edgar
Colonizing
Villan
Wealth Project and Jubilee Justice.
and Jubilee Justice are two organizations that are receiving all the proceeds from your book. And the Decolonizing Wealth Project and Edgar are going to be on in the next episode. Can you tell us what like motivated you to take this step? And like, how do you see your role in the redistribution of wealth in a larger context, and like why and how does wealth tie into this story of healing and repair, and how we can be good relatives to each other?
Yeah, absolutely. First I can name that I find myself in a financial position in this lifetime that enables me to not need to rely on the income from those book sales. And that's one of the reasons I'm able to do that. And I know not everybody is in that position. So I want to say that. And also, with that being said, as you know, the book was percolating and being written and rewritten over years. I just really felt this calling to walk the talk. And, you know, uh, this book is, in many ways, it felt like it was a being who was writing me. I feel in some ways like I didn't even write it, it wrote me. It came to me as an assignment that was clearly delivered to me by an elder named Yeye Louisa Tish. And that story is in the foreword of the book that she wrote, as well as the author's preface that I wrote. But it came through the ethers. It came through the ancestors. It wasn't me sitting down one day and saying, I'm going to write a book. It was much more of something that landed on me, and I was asked to take it up. I was asked to take up this mantle. And so when a project comes through that way, like not even having originated from my own mind or goals per se, but through a spiritual assignment, then I felt like I couldn't really accept income from it to be in integrity. And the message of the book is very strong that reparations are needed, deeply, deeply needed from all of us, not just from our government, but from each and every one of us who have been impacted or involved in this colonial project in any way. Especially, I'm talking mostly to white people, European descended people. All of us have something we can contribute to this effort. And so this is one thing I can contribute, is offering these years of work and reflection and my stories and all that it took to produce that book, offering all of that back to those two projects. And Decolonizing Wealth Project was founded by Edgar Villanueva, and he has got a wonderful staff of people that are helping him run that organization. They have multiple grant-making programs that are based on reparations and Indigenous land rights and empowering youth. So they make all the funding decisions based on their knowledge and expertise of those communities. And then Jubilee Justice is all about Black farming and, the return of Black land ownership, the return to the expertise of farming. You remember the people who had been enslaved were promised 40 acres and a mule. And that promise never came to be. And so
Mm,
it is important to return that relationship with land. You think about who were the people that were working the land here at the beginning of the colonial project, working the land on these plantations. They deserve to have land returned too, I believe, and to reestablish that healthy connection with land and farming. And so that's what Jubilee Justice is about. And I'm really incredibly honored that the leaders of these organizations have agreed to accept these funds, because it's really important to me that it's not a publicity stunt. I just want it to be real. And so I will be, showing them all of my paperwork of what I receive and giving them each half.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. It gives me the chills. Thank you for showing up and really being about it, and not just talking about it, but being about it. It really means a lot, I'm sure, to everyone listening. I know there's white people listening, and there's people of color that are tuned in and listening. There's people from various parts of the world tuned in right now. Is there a core message? Is there one thing that I didn't ask, one thing that you'd like to say as we wrap up here? Something we didn't get to that has significance for you, or anything that you'd like to share with all the people of the spectrum?
Yeah, I would just say that even though things look really scary right now, I really believe that healing is possible. And I was once taught by a Tewa elder named Kathy Sanchez. She gave me permission to share my understanding of what she taught me. And my understanding of that is that healing comes from the inside out, like a butterfly, right? Like this. You start with the healing on the inside, and once that is moving, it can all begin to ripple outside like this. And so taking the time to do our own healing work, our own re-education work, our own grieving work matters. And it is contributing to the bigger process of healing. So I just want to encourage people with that.
Well, thank you, Hilary. Thanks for sharing that. May we all metamorphosize into butterflies. Thanks for sharing your work, for being an incredible anchor here in the movement. Hilary's book, Becoming a Good Relative, Calling White Settlers Towards Truth, Healing, and Repair, is available, and you can pick it up right now. We will have links to the book in the show notes. We'll have links to Jubilee Justice, the Decolonizing Wealth Project, and other resources in the show notes. And we will stay in touch with you, Hilary, through the coming months and years. And would love to have you back at some point on the show to keep sharing your journey.
Thank you so much, Hawah. It was great visiting with you, and yeah, just really grateful.
Me too. Thanks so much, and be well.
You too.
Everlutionary, Transforming and Healing the World, is brought to you by me, Hawah Kasat. If you would like to find out more about my story, head to hawahkasat.com and visit social media, where I'm active on Instagram, Substack, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Facebook. Be sure to share this podcast with a friend, and to make sure you don't miss any future episodes, hit that subscribe button on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Thank you for listening. Stay in touch. Peace.